Hi, I'm Juliana. I'm the co-founder and CTO here at Stytch. I'm joined by Taylor, the founder of Puckdoku today.
Hello.
To kick things off, why don't you give a little bit of background on who you are and what you're building at Puckdoku?
Yeah, for sure. So, my name is Taylor. I'm the kind of sole developer, sole proprietor of a fun hockey trivia app called Puckdoku. So, swept the hockey world by storm this summer, and I'm the guy behind it.
How did you originally come up with the idea for Puckdoku?
So there was this like hockey podcast I was listening to in the summer, and hockey season runs October through June, and so it was like your classic summer content where there's not really a whole lot to talk about. So they're playing this trivia game that someone else had made for baseball, and they had kind of applied it in the podcast. Where one podcast host was quizzing the other host on kind of this like trivia style of like pick a player that played for these two teams and so on and so forth. And like I was listening to that, I think as I was gardening or something like that, and I was thinking, I can probably as a software developer, I can probably build that. Like it's probably not super hard to build, and then I thought, it's probably a lot of work. So I did nothing with it for like a week. Like I just kind of like I forgot about it, and then I was listening to another radio show, and I had heard someone else had like also brought up this baseball trivia, and I thought, you know what, I should just give this a go. So um, that's kind of how I got started, and kind of the rest is history.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about your stack and sort of how you actually built Puckdoku.
Yeah, of course. So, like I've been a front end developer primarily for over a decade now, and like I focus primarily on React and TypeScript. And so, like whenever I have a side project, and at this point it was still a side project, I always want to try and explore new technologies or new things that kind of like broaden my broaden my experience. And so, one of the things that I always wanted to do is build an app with like Next.js, server side rendering, entirely serverless stack, and that's what I did. So I got started with Vercel, and I was it was really kind of trying to like push the envelope with they have a lot of cutting edge things, um, and then I also on the front end side integrated Tailwind CSS, which was really helpful in being able to come up with like a really pretty UI really fast. So it's been great.
Awesome. And you're the developer, the founder, you're doing all the things with Puckdoku. As a solo entrepreneur, how do you think about prioritizing sort of where you're spending your time and investing in both building out the product, but also all the other things that go along with building a business?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that's evolved. I would say since I got started, like when I first got this going, I went from literally like I built the first prototype in 4 nights and a Saturday, and I sent it out there, and it was like immediately took off. Where I went from zero to 100,000 people playing it a day in the span of 7 or 8 days. And so at the beginning, and I actually still have a full time job, so at the beginning, it was all about like just trying to keep ahead of all the things I absolutely needed to do, right? Like the first few days, I only had players up until like 1970 just because I didn't even have the time to go back to like get everything before that, right? Like it just literally didn't have like a free minute. And so at that point, it's all about optimizing for what was the best value I could get from each hour, from each minute, right? Like what like there's literally no time to waste because this thing is taking off, and quite frankly, there's a lot of things I've done wrong. There's a lot of like areas that need to be polished, and so it's just like this like quick panic of trying to get things out quickly. And then um, after that, it's just about what is what is sustainable long term for me, right? Like I can't, as a solo developer, I can't jump into things that are going to take a huge amount of my time because I'm already split a lot of different ways. So I'm picking technologies or picking solutions that I know won't be actually like won't be a long term maintenance problem for me, right? Like it's not like if I'm bringing in this new thing, it's not going to be something that I'm committing 10 hours a week to now support this new thing, right? Because I don't have that time.
Totally. Um, Talk a little bit more about sort of that criteria that you're using when you're deciding which technology to incorporate into your stack. It sounds like sort of being on the cutting edge and trying some of the sort of newer technologies is one thing that got you excited about building this, but then also how do you make sure that the choices you're making, right, are going to be low maintenance?
Yeah, it's a couple things. The first is, going back to my other thing about time is like, what's the easiest for me to adopt, right? Like, it has to fit well within my serverless stack. Actually, that's number one. Number one is it has to fit within my serverless stack because I'm not, looking. I don't want to change any of that because it's kind of that mentality of if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? Like, um, so making sure it fits with server side, like React rendering, React server components, serverless functions for some of the APIs, and something that will like fit like the scaling of my infrastructure, right? Like especially when I hit that initial viral wave, like most of my traffic when I saw was between, you know, 8 and 10 a.m. Pacific, right? And that means like I'm getting like 50,000 people coming through in the span of 2 hours, and then it kind of slowly tapers off through the rest of the day. So um, making sure that it can support um, large spikes, fit within the infrastructure and something I can trust. That's another big thing is, I want something that the community's embraced and that has, people using it today. And then the last thing is pricing. Like I'm not a large corporation with a ton of, revenue streams, right? Like I need something that fits within the budget that I can pay for with the minimal amount of ads I have on the site.
Awesome. That all makes a ton of sense. Were there any early sort of decisions that you made that maybe didn't scale with you when you started to hit that really big inflection point with, yeah, having to handle all that traffic?
Yeah, actually, one of the big things was just even like the player data. So I had like this, like I was doing everything client side, like the entire game was client side because like all the answers you can Google anyways. So there's no real risk of like people cheating because if people want to cheat, they can you can ask ChatGPT for the answers for my game, right? Like it's not really about trying to like protect some sort of integrity. So everything was client side, and that meant it was a very light server footprint, which still is today, and it makes it pretty resilient for certain outages. Um, the downside of sending this entire blob of player data to the client was I incurred pretty nasty data overages through kind of through my service, right? Because every time someone loads the page, even if it's a bot crawling it, it was, you're loading an extra megabyte, right? And so um, trying to optimize for that. So then I started doing things like trying to defer that loading until they make a certain user interaction so that it's not, so if a bot's crawling the site, it's not necessarily going to also download that thing. But even that wasn't enough. So then I had to move it all to server side. But that was probably the biggest early mistake. And I thought that moving it to the client would kind of degrade the user experience more because now there has to be more round trips as they're searching. But I was able to leverage pretty interesting, like at edge distributed network for like serverless functions at edge. And if there's a cache hit, there's still it's a round trip of 30 milliseconds. So you actually barely notice a difference between um, having all that data on the client versus, doing it just one step removed. So I was pretty happy with it, but that was a big early mistake, and it actually cost me like a good amount of money.
Yeah, totally. I feel like something that you probably didn't expect sort of being an issue, and then when you see it, it's like, oh no, we need to
Oh
we
yeah,
need to redo this.
you're starting to do the math, and you're like, I think that's wrong. I think they've made a mistake, and I'm like pulling up the calculator. And I'm like, no, that's right. That's totally right. Yeah.
It sounds like reliability, scalability, and sort of like that trustworthiness are really key factors when you're evaluating
Mhm.
different solutions. How do you think about sort of like evaluating a vendor or technology with that criteria in mind?
Yeah. So one of the things that was really important to me is that it had a good uh, good examples, good documentation where, I'm not going through 30 Stack Overflow pages just to try and like figure out what I need, and I'm not needing to learn like an entirely new like technology as well, right? And so that's first and foremost is, are there very simple to follow recipes, how to's, whatever you want to call it, really good SDK that I can just kind of jump in, make sense, and go. So that's probably the most important. Second for me, especially, is kind of like I guess you'd say like an indie um, company, is that the pricing has to make sense for me, right? I can't, with the scale that I am and was having, very quickly things were falling into like an enterprise tier, and that's just like, it was just immediately unaffordable. Where some of these things I was holding off for you know a month or 2 months because I was so nervous about the scale, and I even had friends going like, "What do you mean? Like you're not going to hit that?" I was like, "I'm going to hit that in days if I'm not careful." So those were kind of the two main criteria.
Awesome. It's super cool to see the success that you've had, and seems like a product that really resonates. What's next for you and Puckdoku?
Um, so I've been trying to leverage more things to give people more reasons to come to the site and stay to the site. So over the last couple of months, I've really been investing in things like being able to play against your friends directly, so like a leaderboard, being able to play past games, user streaks, things that just kind of make the existing product more fun, and things that people would expect out of a trivia game like this. Uh, what's coming next? uh, a little, just a little bit behind the scenes, is I'd like to incorporate kind of more styles of games. Like I have all this great data now for like hockey stats, hockey trivia. Is how can I leverage and kind of like rotate that data in different ways to kind of like, once you come to the site and play the main game, there's more for you to do besides just play and then leave. So trying to find more ways to, more games, more things to be able to interest people, and but that's still very much in the early stages.
Super exciting stuff. Thanks so much for walking us through what you're working on, how you're
Yeah, of
building.
course.